You're out of luck, Grace Vaughn laughs, her smile piercing the dim lighting of the dressing room at Crestwood Academy of Music. Fiona Harris stares at her ruined dress, soaked and crumpled, her violin string snapped by Grace's ruthless. Indeed, the spring gala is just minutes away. Will Fiona's dreams crumble under this vandalism, or will a hidden legacy carry her to victory? Listeners, where are you tuning in today? Drop your location below and share your predictions. Will Fiona survive this betrayal? Subscribe now to follow every thrilling chapter in our latest stories, and never miss what happens next. Will Fiona's talent shine through, or will Grace's cruelty win out? How will a legendary violin and a mother's love change everything? Follow us to discover a story of endurance and music that will take your breath away. Your predictions may be wrong. The practice room at Crestwood Music Academy was a sanctuary of silence, its walls lined with faded posters of Bach and Beethoven, the air thick with the scent of rosin and old wood. Fiona Harris stood alone in the dim light, her long, glossy black hair cascading over her shoulders like a midnight waterfall. At 22, her beauty was undeniable. Her brown eyes sparkled with a quiet fire, catching the glow of the single overhead bulb. But she carried herself with a humility that set her apart. Dressed in a simple white blouse and worn jeans, she eschewed the glittering accessories favored by her peers. Her fingers, calloused yet graceful, adjusted the tuning pegs of a borrowed violin, each twist coaxing a faint hum from the strings. This was her refuge, a place where the world's noise fell away, and she could hear the echo of her father's music. James Harris had been a legend, a black violinist whose performances once brought Carnegie Hall to its knees. His bow had danced across strings with a passion that seemed to pull stars from the sky, his melodies weaving stories of struggle and triumph. Fiona was 7 when he died, taken by a sudden illness that left her and her mother Hannah to navigate, a world dimmed by his absence. Hannah, a nurse with hands as steady as her heart, raised Fiona in a modest Brooklyn apartment, pouring love and resilience into her daughter's spirit. "Your father's music lives in you," Hannah would say, her voice soft but unyielding as she tucked Fiona into bed with stories of James's rise against a world that often tried to silence him. Fiona clutched the violin, its cold wood a stark contrast to the warmth of her memories. She wasn't here by chance. Crestwood, a prestigious academy nestled in the heart of New York, had offered her a scholarship after a local recital where her raw talent, untutored but undeniable, had stunned the judges. Professor Catherine Harper, a stern yet kind woman, with silver-streaked hair and a reputation for nurturing prodigies, saw James in Fiona's playing. "You have his gift," Catherine had said after Fiona's first lesson, her eyes gleaming with conviction. "The spring gala will be your stage. To prove it." The gala, a glittering event attended by the music world's elite, was weeks away, and Fiona felt the weight of expectation pressing against her chest. But not everyone at Crestwood welcomed her. As Fiona drew the bow across the strings, testing a tentative scale, the door creaked open, shattering her solitude. Grace Vaughn sauntered in, her platinum blonde hair catching the light like a halo she didn't deserve. Behind her trailed the Viper Quartet, 3 other violinists whose loyalty to Grace was as sharp as their stilettos. Grace's green eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a smile that was all teeth. "Practicing again, Fiona?" she drawled, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "You know, some of us earned our spot here, not just coasted on a dead dad's name." The words sliced through Fiona like a blade. She lowered the violin, her fingers tightening around the neck. Grace's click tittered, their laughter a cruel chorus. They were daughters of wealth, private tutors, summer conservatories, and instruments that cost more than Hannah's yearly salary. To them, Fiona was an outsider, her scholarship a charity case, her simple clothes a mark of inferiority. "I'm here to play, Grace," Fiona said, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "Same as you." Grace stepped closer, her perfume sharp and cloying. "Oh, honey, you're not the same. You're a novelty, a sob story, for the admissions board." She leaned in, her whisper venomous. "You don't belong here." Fiona's heart pounded, but she held Grace's gaze, her brown eyes unyielding. She'd heard worse. On the subway in the neighborhood where kids mocked her for carrying a violin case instead of a basketball. But here, in this hallowed hall of music, the sting was sharper, the stakes higher. The quartet lingered, their presence a suffocating weight until Catherine's voice cut through the tension. "Ladies, rehearsal starts in 5 minutes." The professor stood at the doorway, her arms crossed, her gaze flicking from Grace to Fiona with a knowing edge. Grace tossed her hair and led her posse out, but not before shooting Fiona a look that promised more trouble. Catherine approached, her expression softening. "Don't let them rattle you, Fiona. They're intimidated by what you have." "And what's that?" Fiona asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Catherine smiled, a rare warmth breaking through her usual reserve. "Your father's soul. It's in every note you play." She gestured to the violin. "Show me the Tchaikovsky again. Let's refine that opening." Fiona nodded, grateful for the distraction. As she raised the violin, the first notes of melody spilled out, tentative but pure, each phrase a thread connecting her to James. The music was her armor, her defiance, her truth. She played until her shoulders ached, until the room seemed to hum with the ghost of her father's presence. Later, as Fiona packed up, the weight of Grace's words lingered. She slung the violin case over her shoulder and stepped into the bustling hallway where students chattered about the gala, their voices a blur of excitement and ambition. Fiona kept her head down, her long hair a curtain against their glances. She didn't see Grace watching from a corner, her eyes glinting with a plan already forming, nor did she hear the whispers of the Viper Quartet plotting to ensure Fiona's spotlight would flicker out. Outside, the New York evening was crisp, the city's pulse a steady rhythm under her feet. Fiona boarded the subway, the violin case a familiar weight against her side. She thought of Hannah, working a late shift at the hospital, her hands bandaging wounds while her heart carried the scars of loss. Fiona pulled out her phone, scrolling to a grainy photo of James on stage, his face alight with passion, his violin, an extension of his soul. "I'll make you proud," she whispered, her breath fogging the screen. The train rattled on, carrying Fiona toward home, toward the music that burned within her. She didn't know the trials awaiting her, the sabotage, the cruelty, the moment when her father's legacy would become her salvation. But in this moment, as the city lights streaked past, Fiona Harris was a spark waiting to ignite, a melody poised to soar, a daughter ready to claim her place in a world that had yet to hear her song. The rehearsal hall at Crestwood Music Academy buzzed with the discordant hum of tuning strings, a chaotic prelude to the afternoon's practice. Fiona Harris stood at the edge of the violin section, her long black hair pulled into a loose braid, her brown eyes scanning the worn sheet music for Tchaikovsky's Melody. Her simple gray sweater and jeans marked her as an outsider among the glittering sequins and designer scarves of her peers. The borrowed violin rested against her shoulder, its weight a reminder of her precarious place in this world of privilege. She was here to play, to carve a space for her father's legacy, but the air felt thick with hostility, a storm brewing in the glances of those who wished her gone. Grace Vaughn glided into the hall, her platinum hair a beacon of arrogance, her emerald dress catching the light like a predator's scales. The Viper Quartet trailed her, their laughter sharp as glass. Fiona braced herself, her fingers tightening around the bow. She'd hoped the confrontation in the practice room would be the end of Grace's taunts, but the smirk on Grace's face promised otherwise. As the orchestra settled, Grace accidentally bumped Fiona's music stand, sending her sheets fluttering to the floor. "Oops," Grace said, her voice a mockery of apology. The quartet snickered, their eyes darting to Fiona, waiting for her to crumble. Fiona knelt, gathering the pages, her cheeks burning. The notes blurred before her eyes, not from tears but from the anger she refused to let spill. She wouldn't give Grace the satisfaction. "Careful, Grace," she said, her tone even. You might trip over your own ego next. A few nearby. Students stifled laughs and Grace's smile faltered, her green eyes flashing with venom. Before she could retort, Professor Catherine Harper clapped her hands, her silver hair glinting under the fluorescent lights. Enough chatter. Violins? Let's begin. The rehearsal demanded focus, but Fiona felt Grace's gaze like a blade at her back. Each time she played a phrase, she sensed the quartet's whispers, their words too soft to catch but sharp enough to wound. During a break, Fiona slipped to corner of the hall, hoping for a moment's peace. She adjusted her violin, testing a soft run of notes, when a gentle voice broke her solitude. You sound incredible, Liam Cole said, his cello case slung over his shoulder. His blue eyes were kind, his sandy hair slightly mussed, a stark contrast to the polished cruelty of Grace's click. Fiona managed a small smile. Thanks, Liam. Just trying to keep up. Liam leaned against the wall, his presence a quiet anchor. They're jealous, you know, Grace and her posse, you're playing. It's got something they'll never have. Fiona shook her head, her braid swaying. They think I'm here because of my dad's name. Liam's gaze softened. You're here because you're you. I heard you at that recital last year. You made that old community center feel like a concert hall. His words warmed her, a rare kindness in Crestwood's cold corridors. But before she could respond, Grace's voice cut through the air. Ah, look, the charity case found a fanboy. The quartet laughed, and Fiona's moment of reprieve was shattered. She returned to her seat, the rehearsal resuming under Catherine's watchful eye. But the bullying didn't stop. When Fiona reached for her water bottle, she found it tipped over, a deliberate puddle soaking her music. Grace's innocent shrug was a lie no one believed. Fiona's jaw clenched, but she wiped the pages with her sleeve, refusing to react. Catherine noticed her lips pressing into a thin line, but she said nothing, her focus on the music. Fiona played on, her notes steady despite the turmoil in her chest. Each stroke of the bow was a defiance, a vow to prove she belonged. After rehearsal, Fiona lingered in the hall, her fingers tracing the violin's curves as she packed up. The other students streamed out, their chatter fading, but Liam stayed. Behind. You okay? He asked, his concern genuine. Fiona sighed, her shoulders sagging. It's like they're waiting for me to fail. Liam nodded, his expression serious. They're scared you'll outshine them at the gala. Grace especially. She's been gunning for that solo spot forever. Fiona's eyes met his, a flicker of gratitude easing her tension. Thanks for sticking up for me, she said softly. Liam grinned, a boyish charm breaking through. Any time, Fiona. As she left the hall, Fiona's steps echoed in the empty corridor. She passed a bulletin board plastered with Gala posters, the event's promise looming like a storm cloud. Her performance was her chance to honor James Harris, but Grace's cruelty cast a shadow over her hope. That evening, Fiona boarded the high subway, the city's pulse a restless rhythm beneath her. At home, Hannah was still at the hospital, her late shift a constant sacrifice. Fiona found a note on the kitchen table. Proud of you, baby. Keep playing. She smiled, but the warmth faded as she opened her backpack. Tucked inside her music folder was a single sheet, defaced with red ink. Go back to the slums. Fiona's breath caught, her fingers trembling as she stared at the words. The Viper Quartet had followed her, their malice seeping into her safe spaces. She sank onto the couch, the apartment's silence amplifying her isolation. Memories of Hannah's stories surfaced, James facing jeers at auditions, his blackness a barrier in a world of white gatekeepers. He turned pain into music. Hannah had said, her voice a beacon in Fiona's darkest moments. Fiona clutched the defaced sheet, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't let Grace break her. She pulled out her phone, scrolling to a video of James performing, his violin singing with a passion that transcended time. Fiona closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. It was a reminder of who she was, of the fire in her blood. The gala was her battleground, and Grace's envy was just noise. Fiona stood, her braids swinging as she moved to the mirror. Her reflection showed a young woman forged in struggle, her brown eyes blazing with purpose. She whispered to herself, "You're a Harris. You don't bend." The city outside hummed, indifferent to her fight. Fiona didn't know the trials ahead, the sabotage that would test her spirit, the legacy that would save her. But tonight, in the quiet of her Brooklyn apartment, she was a spark ready to flare, a melody waiting to rise. Grace Vaughn could scheme, but Fiona Harris would play, and her music would echo far beyond Crestwood's walls. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of Crestwood Music Academy's locker room, casting long shadows across the tiled floor. Fiona Harris stood before her assigned locker, her long black hair loose, framing brown eyes that flickered with quiet resolve. Her simple navy t-shirt and jeans were a stark contrast to the polished elegance of the academy, but she carried herself with a dignity honed by years of adversity. The spring gala was tomorrow, and the weight of her solo performance pressed against her chest like a tightening string. She reached for her locker, expecting to find her borrowed violin, its familiar scratches a testament to countless practice. Hours. But as the door swung open, a chill ran through her, sharp as a snapped string. The violin case was there, but it sagged unnaturally, its contents violated. Fiona's hands trembled as she unlatched it, revealing the instrument inside. Its strings severed, dangling like broken promises. The bridge was cracked, a jagged wound across the wood. Scrawled on the inside of the case in black marker were the words, "You don't belong." Her breath caught, a gasp swallowed by the silence of the empty room. This was no accident. The Viper Quartet's malice had escalated from whispers to destruction, and Fiona knew whose hand had wielded the blade. Grace Vaughn's smirk, her taunting charity case jibes flashed in Fiona's mind, a poison seeping into her resolve. She sank to the cold floor, the case cradled in her lap, her fingers tracing the ruined strings. The violin wasn't hers, but it was her lifeline, the tool through which she channeled her father's legacy. James Harris, the virtuoso whose music had once silenced skeptics, seemed impossibly distant now. Fiona's heart pounded, a drumbeat of fear and fury. The gala was her chance to prove she was more than a scholarship student, more than Grace's punching bag. Without an instrument, that chance was slipping away, a melody fading into dissonance. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Fiona tensed, half expecting Grace to appear, gloating. Instead, Liam Cole's familiar figure paused at the doorway, his cello case slung over his shoulder, his blue eyes widening as he saw her. "Fiona, what happened?" he asked, kneeling beside her. His voice was soft, but the concern in it was a lifeline. Fiona gestured to the violin, her throat too tight for words. Liam's jaw clenched as he read the scrawled message. "Grace," he muttered, the name a curse. "She's trying to break you before the gala." Fiona shook her head, her braids swaying. "She might succeed," she whispered, her voice cracking. Liam placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. "She won't. You're stronger than this." But Fiona wasn't sure. The Academy's resources were stretched thin. Replacing the violin before tomorrow was unlikely. She stood, clutching the case, and forced a nod. "I'll figure something out," she said, more to herself than to Liam. He offered to walk her to Professor Catherine Harper's office, but Fiona declined. She needed to face this alone. The campus was alive with gala preparations, students, hauling decorations, faculty barking orders, but Fiona moved through it like a ghost, the ruined violin case a weight dragging her down. She avoided the rehearsal hall, where Grace and her clique were likely preening, and headed to the library, seeking a quiet corner to think. There, among dusty scores and flickering fluorescent lights, she sat, her mind racing. Reporting the sabotage might backfire. Grace's family had influence, and Fiona's word carried little weight. But giving up wasn't an option. She thought of Hannah, her mother's tireless strength, and felt a spark of defiance flicker within her. By afternoon, Fiona returned home, the Brooklyn apartment a haven of worn furniture and familiar warmth. Hannah was at the hospital, her shift not ending until evening, but the sight of her mother's handwritten notes on the fridge, "Keep shining, baby," steadied Fiona's resolve. She set the violin case on the kitchen table, its contents a stark reminder of her vulnerability. The Gala was 24 hours away, and without an instrument, she'd be silenced before she could even begin. Fiona's fingers brushed the case, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She couldn't let Grace win, not when James's music still burned in her blood. The door creaked open and Hannah stepped inside, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from a long shift, her face etched with exhaustion. But her eyes, sharp and knowing, locked onto Fiona's. "What's wrong, baby?" she asked, dropping her bag and crossing the room. Fiona's composure crumbled, the story spilling out in a rush, the severed strings, the cruel message, Grace's relentless campaign to crush her. Tears fell as she spoke, each word a weight lifted. Hannah listened, her expression darkening, her hands clenched into fists. When Fiona finished, a heavy silence hung between them, broken only by the distant hum of the city. Hannah stood, her movements deliberate, and disappeared into her bedroom. Fiona waited, confused, until her mother returned with a worn leather violin case, its surface etched with years of care. "This was your father's," Hannah said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. She opened the case, revealing a 19th century Italian violin, its amber finish glowing like a captured sunset. The instrument was pristine, a relic of James's brilliance, untouched since his death. Fiona's breath caught, her fingers hovering over the strings, afraid to disturb its sacred stillness. "He'd want you to play it tomorrow," Hannah said, her eyes fierce with pride. "Show them who you are, Fiona. Show them what a Harris can do." Fiona lifted the violin, its weight both foreign and familiar, as if James's spirit lingered. In the wood, she tucked it under her chin, drawing the bow across the strings. A single note rang out, rich and resonant, filling the small apartment with a warmth that chased away her fear. Hannah watched, a tear tracing her cheek. "You're stronger than their hate," she said, pulling Fiona into a tight embrace. "This violin is your armor. Use it." Fiona nodded, her heart swelling with purpose. The sabotage had been a blow, but Hannah's gift was a shield. Grace had tried to silence her, but Fiona would play her father's violin, a voice no one could steal. As night fell over Brooklyn, Fiona sat with the instrument, its presence a promise. Tomorrow she would face Crestwood's spotlight, and Grace's cruelty would be no match for the music in her soul. The morning of the spring gala dawned over Crestwood Music Academy with a deceptive calm, the New York sky a pale gray that hinted at storms to come. Fiona Harris stepped into the academy's dressing room, her long black hair tied back, her brown eyes shadowed with a mix of nerves and determination. Her simple black t-shirt and jeans were out of place amid the chaos of sequined gowns and clinking jewelry, but she carried James Harris's violin case like a talisman, its worn leather a reminder of her father's enduring presence. The gala was hours away, her solo performance of Tchaikovsky's Melody, a make-or-break moment to prove she belonged. But as she pushed open the dressing room door, a cold dread coiled in her stomach, sharper than any note she'd ever played. The room was empty, its mirrors reflecting racks of costumes and scattered makeup palettes. Fiona set the violin case on a chair and approached the garment bag labeled with her name, a loan from the Academy's wardrobe department. She unzipped it, expecting the emerald green gown that would transform her into a performer worthy of Crestwood's stage. Instead, a sodden mass of fabric spilled out, dripping water onto the floor, the silk ruined beyond salvage. Her breath hitched, her hands trembling as she lifted the dress, its once vibrant hue dulled to a sickly shade. The sabotage didn't end there. Her makeup bag lay open, its contents smeared across the mirror in a chaotic swirl of lipstick and eyeshadow. Scrawled in crimson was a single word: nobody. Fiona's knees buckled, and she gripped the counter to steady herself. The Viper Quartet's cruelty had struck again, their malice now a physical wound. Grace Vaughn's face loomed in her mind, her smug grin, her taunting "you don't belong," echoing from the locker room sabotage. This was no mere prank. It was a calculated attempt to erase Fiona from the gala, to snuff out her chance to shine. Her heart raced, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the distant hum of gala preparations. Without a gown, without makeup, she'd be a laughingstock, her father's legacy tarnished by her failure to even take the stage. Laughter drifted from the hallway, sharp and familiar. Fiona peered through the door's small window, catching sight of Grace in a glittering silver gown, her platinum hair swept into an elegant updo. The Viper Quartet flanked her, their eyes glinting with triumph as they hovered near the rehearsal hall. Grace was practicing, her bow slicing through the air with an exaggerated flourish, her notes precise but soulless. "I'm ready, Professor Harper," she called loudly, her voice carrying to where Professor Catherine Harper paced, her silver-streaked hair catching the light. Catherine checked her watch, her brow furrowed. "Where's Fiona?" she muttered, her concern a faint spark in Fiona's darkening world. Fiona sank back against the wall, the ruined gown clutched to her chest. The gala was in 2 hours, and Grace was poised to steal her solo, her sabotage a perfect trap. Fiona's fingers brushed the violin case, its presence a lifeline, but even James's instrument couldn't mend this disaster. She fumbled for her chalky phone, her hands shaking as she texted Hannah. "They ruined my dress, I don't know what to do." The message felt like a surrender, but Fiona had no one else to turn to. She slid to the floor, the cold tiles seeping through her jeans, and buried her face in her hands. The word nobody burned behind her eyelids, a cruel echo of every doubt she'd ever faced. Minutes ticked by, each one a nail in her fading hope. Then the dressing room door flew open, and Hannah Harris stormed in, her nurse's scrubs swapped for a tailored blazer, her face a mask of fierce determination. She carried a garment bag and a small makeup kit, her eyes blazing as they took in the scene. The dripping gown, the defaced mirror, Fiona's crumpled form. "Oh, baby," Hannah said, dropping to her knees beside her daughter. Her voice was a fortress, steady and unyielding. "They think they can break you, but they don't know who you're made of." Fiona's tears spilled over, her voice a whisper. "They ruined everything, Mama. The dress, my makeup, Grace is out there, ready to take my place." Hannah's jaw tightened, her gaze flicking to the mirror's cruel message. "Nobody? That's their lie, not your truth." She stood, pulling Fiona to her feet with a strength that belied her weary frame. "You're James Harris's daughter, and you're going to shine brighter than they can stand." Hannah unzipped the garment bag, revealing a crimson gown, its silk shimmering like a flame. "I've been saving for this," she said, her voice thick with pride. "It's yours." Fiona's breath caught, her fingers brushing the fabric, soft as a whisper. The gown was a masterpiece, its cut elegant yet bold, a far cry from the Academy's loner. Hannah set to work, her nurse's precision guiding her hands as she braided Fiona's hair into an intricate updo, each twist a defiance of the chaos around them. She opened the makeup kit, applying subtle foundation, a sweep of blush and a touch of eyeliner that made Fiona's brown eyes glow like polished amber. "Look at yourself," Hannah said, turning Fiona to a clean corner of the mirror. The reflection showed a woman transformed, not just a performer, but a warrior, her beauty a quiet power. Hannah stepped back, her eyes glistening. "They can't dim your light, Fiona, not with this." She tapped the violin case, a reminder of James's legacy. "You go out there and play like the world is listening, because it will be." Fiona hugged her mother, the crimson gown rustling, her heart swelling with a fire she hadn't felt before. The sabotage had been a cruel blow, but Hannah's love was a shield, her gift a sword. Grace had tried to erase her, but Fiona would walk onto that stage, her father's violin in hand, her mother's strength in her veins. As Hannah gathered the ruined gown, her expression hardened. "We'll deal with them later," she said, her voice low but resolute. Fiona nodded, her resolve crystallizing. The Gala was her battleground, and she would not be silenced. She lifted the violin case, its weight a promise, and stepped toward the door, the crimson gown trailing like a banner of defiance. The hallway loomed ahead, Grace's laughter a distant taunt, but Fiona's steps were steady, her brown eyes blazing with purpose. She was ready to face the spotlight, to turn cruelty into triumph, to let her music roar. The auditorium of Crestwood Music Academy thrummed with the restless energy of an expectant crowd, its velvet seats filled with the glitter of New York's music elite. Chandeliers cast a golden glow over the polished wood stage, where a grand piano stood sentinel, awaiting the night's performers. Fiona Harris paused at the edge of the hallway, her crimson gown a blaze of defiance against the muted elegance of the scene. Her long black hair, braided into an intricate updo by Hannah's steady hands, framed brown eyes that burned with a quiet ferocity. In her arms she cradled her father's violin case, its worn leather a tether to James Harris's legacy. The spring gala was minutes away, and Fiona's solo was the crescendo of her fight to belong. But as she took a breath, the weight of Grace Vaughn's sabotage lingered, a shadow she was determined to outshine. The hallway was a flurry of last-minute preparations, students adjusting bow ties, faculty whispering logistics, but Fiona's presence cut through the chaos like a struck chord. Her gown shimmered, its silk hugging her frame with a grace that silenced the chatter. She felt the eyes of her peers, some curious, others envious, but it was the Viper Quartet's reaction that stopped her heart. Grace Vaughn stood near the auditorium doors, her silver gown glittering like a cold star, her platinum hair a crown of arrogance. The quartet flanked her, their faces a gallery of shock as Fiona approached. Grace's jaw dropped, her green eyes narrowing as her plan unraveled. She'd expected Fiona to crumble, to slink away in defeat after the ruined gown and defaced mirror. Instead, Fiona stood radiant, a phoenix risen from their cruelty. "You're late," Grace hissed, recovering her composure, her voice dripping with venom. "I was about to step in for you." The lie was blatant. Her bow was nowhere in sight, her posture too poised for performance. Fiona met her gaze, her voice steady. "I'm here now, Grace. No need to trouble yourself." The quartet exchanged glances, their confidence faltering, but Grace's smirk returned, a predator scenting blood. "Break a leg," she said, the words a veiled threat. Fiona didn't flinch, her brown eyes unyielding as she brushed past, the violin case a shield against their malice. Inside the auditorium, the air was thick with anticipation. Fiona slipped through a side entrance, her steps muffled by the plush carpet. The audience was a sea of faces, patrons in tailored suits, students clutching programs, faculty nodding approvingly at the decor. In the front row, Hannah sat in her best dress, her face glowing with pride despite the hospital shift she'd just endured. Beside her, Liam Cole, his sandy hair neat for once, offered a thumbs up, his blue eyes warm with encouragement. Fiona's heart lifted, a flicker of calm in the storm of her nerves. But another figure caught her eye. Victor Langston, the arts patron whose name was whispered in awe, sat near the stage, his notepad open, his keen gaze scanning the room for talent. Professor Catherine Harper paced near the stage, her silver-streaked hair catching the light, her expression taut with worry. She spotted Fiona and exhaled, relief softening her stern features. "Thank God, Fiona," she said, hurrying over. "I was about to send someone to find you." Her eyes flicked to the crimson gown, a question forming, but Fiona shook her head slightly, unwilling to recount the sabotage now. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. Catherine nodded, her trust in Fiona unwavering. "You're up after the quartet. Take your place backstage." Fiona's stomach churned, the reality of the moment crashing over her. This was it, her chance to honor James, to silence Grace, to prove she was more than nobody. Backstage, the darkness was a cocoon, the hum of the audience a distant roar. Fiona stood in the wings, her fingers tracing the violin case's latches, each click a heartbeat. The Viper Quartet's performance was underway, their notes technically flawless but lacking soul, a polished veneer that couldn't touch Fiona's raw passion. She opened the case, lifting James's violin, its amber finish glowing under the dim lights. The instrument felt alive, as if her father's spirit pulsed within it, urging her forward. She tucked it under her chin, testing a single note, its resonance steadying her racing pulse. This was her weapon, her voice, her truth. The quartet's performance ended to polite applause, and Grace swept off the stage, her silver gown catching Fiona's eye. "Don't choke," Grace whispered as she passed, her smirk a dagger. Fiona ignored her, her focus narrowing to the stage. Catherine appeared, her hand on Fiona's shoulder. "Play from your heart," she said, her voice a quiet command. Fiona nodded, her throat tight. She glanced at the audience, finding Hannah's gaze, her mother's pride, a beacon. Liam's encouraging nod grounded her, and even Victor Langston's attentive posture sparked a flicker of hope. This was her moment, not Grace's, not the Academy's, hers. The stage manager signaled, and Fiona's heart thundered, a wild rhythm that threatened to drown her. The spotlight awaited, a circle of light that would expose every flaw, every fear. Her crimson gown rustled as she moved, the silk a second skin of courage. She thought of James, his bow dancing under 1,000 lights, his music a defiance of a world that tried to dim him. She thought of Hannah, her hands braiding love into Fiona's hair, her voice a vow that Fiona was enough. The weight of their sacrifices, their belief, anchored her. Fiona stepped toward the stage, the violin in her hands, her brown eyes blazing with purpose. The audience hushed, a collective breath held as she crossed the threshold. The spotlight found her, its warmth a challenge and a promise. She stood alone, the crimson gown of flame, James's violin a sword. Grace's sabotage, the Viper Quartet's cruelty, the word nobody, all faded in the face of this moment. Fiona raised the violin, her heart a melody waiting to soar. The stage was hers, and the world would hear her song. The spotlight burned, like a solitary sun, pinning Fiona Harris to the center of Crestwood Music Academy's stage. Her crimson gown glowed, a defiant flame against the dark expanse of the auditorium, its silk whispering with each breath. Her long black hair, braided intricately by Hannah's hands, framed brown eyes that shimmered with a storm of nerves and resolve. In her hands, James Harris's violin rested, its amber finish alive under the light, a relic of her father's genius, now hers to wield. The audience was a silent sea, their faces blurred into a mosaic of expectation. Patrons, students, faculty, all waiting for the scholarship girl to falter. Fiona's heart thundered, a wild cadence threatening to drown her, but she stood tall, the weight of her father's legacy anchoring her to this moment. The spring Gala was her crucible, and Tchaikovsky's melody her sword. She raised the violin, tucking it under her chin, the wood cool against her skin. The bow hovered, a breath away from the strings as she closed her eyes. The world fell away, Grace Vaughn's smirks, the sabotaged gown, the word nobody scrawled in venom. In their place rose memories of James, his bow dancing under 1,000 lights, his music a rebellion against a world that tried to silence him. She saw Hannah, her mother's hands braiding courage into her hair, her voice a vow that Fiona was enough. The first note trembled into existence, soft yet piercing, a single thread of sound weaving through the silence. It was not perfect, but it was hers, raw and alive, carrying the weight of her heart. The melody unfolded, its haunting phrases a tapestry of longing and strength. Fiona's fingers moved with an instinct born of James's blood, each note a brushstroke painting her story. The music swelled, her bow a conduit for emotions too vast for words. Grief for a father lost, defiance against those who scorned her, love for the mother who never wavered. Technical imperfections lingered, the slight hesitations of a novice, but they were eclipsed by a soulful depth that gripped the audience. Her phrasing was intuitive, each pause a breath, each crescendo a cry. The violin sang, its voice rich and resonant, as if James himself guided her hands, his spirit woven into every vibration. In the front row, Hannah sat transfixed, her hands clasped, tears tracing her cheeks. Her pride was a beacon, a silent promise that Fiona's fight was theirs together. Beside her, Liam Cole leaned forward, his blue eyes wide with awe, his applause already forming in his clenched fists. Victor Langston, the arts patron whose presence loomed large, scribbled furiously in his notepad, his stern face softening with something like wonder. Even Professor Catherine Harper, standing in the wings, nodded slightly, her silver-streaked hair catching the light, her faith in Fiona vindicated. But not all watched with admiration. Grace Vaughn lingered backstage, her silver gown dimmed by Fiona's radiance, her green eyes narrowed with envy. The Viper Quartet huddled nearby, their whispers stilled, their plot to break Fiona unraveling note by note. Fiona played on, lost in the music's embrace. The melody was her story, Brooklyn's gritty streets, Hannah's late-night shifts, James's unfulfilled dreams. Each phrase was a defiance of Grace's cruelty, a reclamation of the space she'd been denied. Her body swayed, the crimson gown flowing like liquid fire, her braid a dark crown. The audience was spellbound, their breaths held, their world narrowed to the girl and her violin. A student in the back forgot to cough, and a patron's program slipped to the floor unnoticed. Fiona's music was a force, a tide that pulled them into her heart, where pain and triumph danced as one. As the final notes approached, Fiona's eyes remained closed, her soul laid bare. The melody softened, a tender farewell that hung in the air like a sigh. She drew the bow one last time, the sound fading into a silence so profound it seemed the world held its breath. Then, like a dam breaking, applause erupted, a thunderous wave that shook the auditorium. Fiona opened her eyes, startled by the standing ovation, the sea of faces now sharp and vivid. Hannah was on her feet, clapping fiercely, her tears a mirror of Fiona's own. Liam's grin was boyish, his applause a drumbeat of joy. Victor Langston rose slowly, his nod a seal of approval, while Catherine's rare smile spoke volumes. Fiona lowered the violin, her hands trembling, the bow slick with sweat. The spotlight felt warmer now, a caress rather than a challenge. She bowed, the crimson gown pooling around her, her heart soaring with a joy she'd never known. This was her triumph, not just over Grace, but over every doubt that had ever chained her. The audience's cheers grew louder, a chant of her name, Fiona, Fiona, that echoed like a heartbeat. She caught Grace's gaze backstage, the other girl's face a mask of shock and fury. Her silver gown suddenly garish. The Viper Quartet stood frozen, their malice exposed as futile. Fiona's music had spoken, and it was louder than their hate. Backstage, Hannah rushed to her, enveloping Fiona in a tight embrace. "You did it, baby," she whispered, her voice thick with pride. "Your father's smiling right now." Fiona clung to her, the violin case pressed between them, its weight a shared legacy. Catherine approached, her stern demeanor softened. "That was extraordinary, Fiona," she said, her hand on Fiona's shoulder. "You've honored us all." Liam appeared, his cello case forgotten, his words stumbling in his excitement. "I've never heard anything like that," he said, his blue eyes shining. "You were incredible." Fiona smiled, warmth spreading through her, his kindness a balm after weeks of cruelty. The crowd's applause lingered, a distant roar as Fiona caught her breath. Victor Langston's silhouette moved through the audience, his notepad tucked away, his interest in Fiona unmistakable. Grace slunk away, her clique trailing, their defeat palpable. Fiona stood amidst her allies, the violin in her hands, her crimson gown a testament to her resilience. She had played, and the world had listened. This was her melody, her triumph, a note struck against the darkness, resonating far beyond the stage. The backstage of Crestwood Music Academy's auditorium pulsed with a feverish energy, the echoes of Fiona Harris's performance still reverberating through the walls. Her crimson gown shimmered under the dim lights, its silk a testament to her defiance, while her long black hair, braided with Hannah's love, framed brown eyes that glistened with the afterglow of triumph. James Harris's violin rested in its case, its amber finish a silent witness to the melody that had silenced doubters. The spring gala's applause lingered in Fiona's ears, a thunderous affirmation of her place in this world of music. But as she stood amidst the clutter of props and cables, her heart raced with a new uncertainty. The stage had been her battleground, but the war wasn't over. Grace Vaughn's shadow loomed, and the future stretched before Fiona like an unwritten score. Hannah enveloped her in a fierce embrace, her hospital scrub sent a grounding force. "You were unstoppable, baby," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. Fiona clung to her, the violin case pressed between them, its weight a shared legacy. Professor Catherine Harper approached, her silver-streaked hair catching the light, her stern face softened by pride. "You've redefined what's possible, Fiona," she said, her hand a steady anchor on Fiona's shoulder. Liam Cole lingered. Nearby, his sandy hair mussed, his blue eyes alight with admiration. "That was unreal," he stammered, his cello case forgotten. "You owned that stage." Fiona managed a shy smile, warmth spreading through her, his kindness a balm after weeks of cruelty. The moment was shattered as Victor Langston emerged from the shadows, his imposing figure cutting through the backstage chaos. His tailored suit and silver hair commanded attention, his notepad tucked under his arm like a judge's gavel. The arts patron's reputation preceded him, a discoverer of hidden gems, a gatekeeper to the world's grandest stages. Fiona's breath caught as he approached, his gravelly voice resonant. "Miss Harris," he said, his eyes sharp yet kind. "Your performance was a revelation. Tchaikovsky would have wept." The weight of his words hit Fiona like a cord, her knees weakening. Hannah's grip tightened, her pride a silent roar. Langston's gaze swept over the group, settling on Fiona. "I've seen countless performers, but your raw musicality is rare. You play with a soul that can't be taught." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I'd like to meet with you and your mother to discuss a full scholarship to our International Conservatory program in Paris. Your talent deserves the world stage." Fiona's heart stopped, the offer a melody too grand to grasp. Hannah gasped, her hand covering her mouth, tears spilling over. "Paris," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Fiona nodded, overwhelmed, her voice barely audible. "I'd be honored, sir." Langston's nod was curt, but his eyes held a warmth that promised sincerity. "We'll arrange a meeting next week," he said, handing Hannah a card embossed with gold. As he turned to leave, his parting words lingered. "You're not just James Harris's daughter, Miss Harris. You're a force of your own." Fiona stood frozen, the card in Hannah's hand a key to a future she'd never dared dream. Liam's grin was infectious, his "you're going to Paris" a burst of joy that eased her shock. Catherine's rare smile widened, her faith in Fiona now a prophecy fulfilled. But the euphoria was cut short by a new presence. A security guard, his uniform crisp, approached Catherine, his expression grim. "Professor Harper, you need to see this," he said, holding a tablet. Fiona's stomach twisted, a premonition of trouble. The guard tapped the screen, revealing grainy security footage from the dressing room. The timestamp showed the morning's chaos, and there, in stark clarity, was Grace Vaughn, pouring water over Fiona's emerald gown, her smirk unmistakable. The Viper Quartet laughed, smearing lipstick across the mirror, scrawling "nobody" with malicious glee. Fiona's breath hitched, the betrayal now undeniable. A wound reopened. Hannah's face darkened, her nurse's calm giving way to a mother's. "Fury. They did this," she said, her voice low but lethal. "They tried to destroy her." Catherine's jaw clenched, her eyes flashing with anger. "This is unacceptable," she said, turning to the guard. "Who else has seen this?" The guard shook his head. "Just us, ma'am. The footage is secure." Fiona stared at the screen, Grace's cruelty frozen in time. The gown, the makeup, the word nobody, all part of a plot to steal her moment. But she'd played, and Grace had failed. Hannah's resolve crystallized, her voice cutting through the tension. "We're not letting this go," she said, her eyes locked on Fiona. "They don't get to hurt you and walk away." She turned to Catherine. "I'm filing a formal complaint with the Academy, and I'll press charges for vandalism and harassment." Fiona's heart swelled, her mother's strength a fortress. Catherine nodded, her voice firm. "I'll support you. This ends now." The guard promised to preserve the footage, his presence a quiet assurance of justice. Liam stepped closer, his hand brushing Fiona's arm. "You don't deserve this," he said softly, his blue eyes fierce with loyalty. Fiona met his gaze, a spark of connection igniting. "Thanks, Liam," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil. The backstage area buzzed with performers exiting, oblivious to the drama unfolding. Grace and her clique were nowhere in sight, likely basking in their false victory, unaware that their actions were exposed. Fiona's triumph on stage was now a prelude to a reckoning, her music a spark that would ignite change. Hannah tucked Langston's card into her purse, her expression a mix of pride and resolve. "You're going to Paris, baby," she said, squeezing Fiona's hand. "And we're going to make sure no one ever tries to dim you again." Fiona nodded, the crimson gown rustling, James's violin case a silent vow. The scholarship was a dream, but Hannah's fight was a shield protecting Fiona's future. Catherine vowed to address the Academy's culture, her authority a promise of reform. Liam lingered, his quiet support a bridge to something new, a warmth Fiona felt but couldn't yet name. As the group dispersed, Fiona stood alone for a moment, the auditorium's hum fading. The gala had been her proving ground, and she'd emerged victorious. But Grace's sabotage, now exposed, was a wound that demanded justice. Fiona touched the violin case, her fingers tracing its leather, her brown eyes blazing with purpose. She was James Harris's daughter, Hannah's warrior, and now a star rising in Paris. The fight wasn't over, but Fiona was ready, her melody a force no one could silence. The morning sun pierced the windows of Crestwood Music Academy, casting long fingers of light across the rehearsal hall where Fiona Harris stood, her crimson gown replaced by a simple navy sweater and jeans. Her long black hair fell loose, framing brown eyes that held a quiet strength, tempered by the fire of her recent triumph. James Harris's violin case rested at her feet, its amber-hued instrument now a symbol of her victory at the spring gala. The auditorium's echoes had faded, but Fiona's melody lingered in the air, a melody that had shifted her world. Yet, as she tuned a borrowed violin for a morning practice, the weight of Grace Vaughan's sabotage pressed against her, a wound demanding resolution. Today, justice would speak, and Fiona's future would take shape in its wake. The academy buzzed with a nervous energy, students whispering in clusters, their eyes darting to Fiona as she moved through the halls. News of the security footage, Grace and the Viper Quartet ruining Fiona's gown, defacing her mirror with nobody, had spread like wildfire. Hannah Harris, her mother's resolve as fierce as a storm, had acted swiftly, filing a formal complaint. With the academy and pressing charges for vandalism and harassment, Fiona felt a pang of guilt for the chaos her ordeal had unleashed. But Hannah's words echoed in her mind. "They don't get to hurt you and walk away." She clutched the violin, its strings humming under her fingers, a reminder of her right to be here. In the dean's office, a somber meeting unfolded. Fiona sat beside Hannah, her mother's tailored blazer a stark contrast to her nurse's scrubs, her face a fortress of determination. Professor Catherine Harper was there, her silver-streaked hair pulled back, her expression grave. The dean, Dr. Eleanor Ramsey, a stern woman with a reputation for fairness, reviewed the footage on a laptop, Her lips pursed. Grace Vaughn and her clique, Lila, Sophie, and Claire, sat across the table, their faces pale, their usual arrogance stripped away. Grace's platinum hair hung limp, her green eyes avoiding Fiona's gaze, her silver gown a distant memory of her failed plot. "Doctor." Ramsey's voice was cold, cutting through the tension. "The evidence is irrefutable. You deliberately sabotaged Miss Harris's performance, an act of malice that violates our code of conduct." Grace shifted, her voice a weak protest. "It was just a prank." Hannah's eyes flashed, her hand gripping Fiona's. "A prank doesn't ruin a gown, destroy property, or try to break someone's spirit," she said, her tone lethal. Fiona's heart swelled, her mother's fury a shield. Dr. Ramsey raised a hand, silencing Grace. "Effective immediately. You four are suspended for the semester. You'll perform community service, and this will be noted on your permanent records." Fiona watched as Grace's face crumpled, her dreams of a solo career dimming. Lila's eyes welled with tears. Sophie stared at the floor, and Claire's defiance flickered out. The punishment was severe, a mark that would follow them beyond Crestwood. Fiona felt no joy, only a quiet relief, the weight of their cruelty lifting. Dr. Ramsey turned to Fiona, her voice softening. "Miss Harris, your resilience is remarkable. We're implementing anti-bullying policies to ensure this never happens again." Catherine nodded, her commitment to reform unwavering. Fiona managed a nod, her voice steady. "Thank you." Outside, the campus felt lighter, the spring air carrying a promise of change. Fiona walked with Liam Cole, his cello case bumping against his side, his sandy hair catching the sunlight. Their friendship had deepened since the gala, his quiet support a constant in her storm. "You okay?" he asked, his blue eyes searching hers. Fiona smiled, a rare ease settling over her. "Better now. It's like I can breathe again." Liam grinned, his boyish charm infectious. "You were always going to win, you know. Grace never stood a chance." Fiona laughed, the sound bright, a note of freedom. Their conversation turned to music, their shared passion a bridge. Liam suggested a duet for a regional showcase, his enthusiasm sparking an idea. "Violin and cello," he said, his eyes alight. "We could do something bold, maybe foray." Fiona's heart lifted, the prospect of creating with Liam a new kind of triumph. They sat on a bench, sketching ideas, their laughter mingling with the campus's hum. Fiona felt a warmth she couldn't name, a connection that hinted at more. But for now, their music was enough. Back at Crestwood, the academy transformed. Dr. Ramsey announced new policies, mandatory workshops on inclusivity, a reporting system for harassment, and increased funding for scholarships. Fiona's ordeal had exposed cracks in the institution, and her triumph had inspired change. Students who once ignored her now nodded in respect, their whispers now of admiration. Fiona felt the shift, her invisibility replaced by a quiet presence. She practiced daily, James's violin singing under her fingers, each note a step toward Paris, where Victor Langston's scholarship awaited. That evening, Fiona returned to Brooklyn, the apartment a haven of warmth. Hannah was cooking, the scent of spices filling the air, her face softer now that justice had been served. "You're going to soar, baby," she said, setting a plate before Fiona. "Paris is just the start." Fiona hugged her, the violin case nearby, its presence a vow. She thought of James, his music a legacy she was now living, and of Hannah, whose strength had carried her through. The gala had been a battle, but this was her victory, a future unfolding, a melody of her own. At a community concert the next week, Fiona played James's violin, dedicating the piece to her parents. The small crowd, including Liam, watched. In awe, her notes woven a story of resilience. Liam's applause was the loudest, his smile a promise of partnership. Fiona felt her father's spirit in the music, her mother's love in the air, and her power in each stroke of the bow. Crestwood was changing, Grace's clique was silenced, and Fiona Harris was rising, her path to Paris paved with courage and song. The Théâtre des Champs-Élysées in Paris glowed under a velvet night, its Art Deco arches framing a stage where history and music intertwined. Fiona Harris stood in the spotlight, her long black hair cascading in soft waves, her brown eyes alight with a fire that had grown fiercer over the years. At 26, her beauty was a quiet force, her crimson gown, reminiscent of that fateful spring gala, hugging her frame like a second skin. In her hands, James Harris's violin sang, its 19th century amber finish catching the light, a relic of her father's genius, now a beacon of her own. Beside her, Liam Cole, his sandy hair neat, his blue eyes warm with love, drew his bow across a cello, their duet a vibrant dance of strings. The audience, a tapestry of global faces, held its breath, captivated by a story told in music, a tale of triumph born from adversity. Fiona's bow moved with a grace honed by years of training, each note of their foray duet a thread weaving love, loss, and victory. The violin and cello intertwined, her melody soaring, his harmony grounding, a partnership that mirrored their lives. Paris had been her crucible, Victor Langston's scholarship transforming her from Crestwood's underdog to a rising star. She'd spent years in the city's conservatories, her fingers bleeding from practice, her heart expanding with every lesson. Liam had joined her, their letters and visits blossoming into a love as deep as their music. Now, on this world stage, they played not just for the audience but for each other, their notes a vow of resilience and devotion. The music swelled, Fiona's violin singing with a passion that echoed James Harris's legacy. She closed her eyes, memories flooding her. Brooklyn's gritty streets, Hannah's late-night embraces, the gala where she'd defied Grace Vaughn's cruelty. That night had been a spark, igniting a path that led here, to a stage where her father's dreams found new life. The audience felt it, their silence a reverence, their eyes locked on Fiona's swaying form. A critic in the front row scribbled, awestruck. A young girl in the balcony clutched her program, seeing her own dreams in Fiona's bow. The duet's final notes lingered, a tender farewell that hung in the air, and then applause erupted, a thunderous wave that shook the theater. Fiona opened her eyes, her breath catching at the standing ovation. Liam's grin was radiant, his hand reaching for hers as they bowed, their fingers entwined. The crimson gown rustled, a nod to her past, while James's violin gleamed, a bridge to her father. Backstage, Hannah waited, her face lined with years of sacrifice, her eyes wet with pride. She wore a simple navy dress, her nurse's hands now a symbol of unwavering love. "You're everything he dreamed you'd be," she whispered, pulling Fiona into a tight embrace. Fiona clung to her, the violin case nearby, its presence a shared heartbeat. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mama," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. Liam joined them, his cello case slung over his shoulder, his love for Fiona a quiet strength. "You were incredible," he said, his blue eyes soft. Fiona smiled, warmth spreading through her. Their journey hadn't been easy, long-distance rehearsals, the pressure of Paris's elite circles, but their love had grown, a melody that weathered every storm. Hannah squeezed Liam's arm, her approval a silent blessing. The backstage buzzed with well-wishers, critics, and patrons, but Fiona's world narrowed to her mother and her partner, the anchors of her heart. The theater's legacy lingered, its walls whispering of Ravel and Stravinsky, now joined by Fiona Harris. Her story had rippled beyond Crestwood, inspiring reforms that ensured no student faced the cruelty she'd endured. The Academy's new policies, anti-bullying workshops, scholarships for underrepresented voices, bore her name, a quiet tribute to her fight. Fiona had visited Crestwood last year, speaking to students, her violin a testament to possibility. Professor Catherine Harper, now retired, had wept, her pride in Fiona a legacy of its own. Grace Vaughn and the Viper Quartet were distant memories, their suspensions a footnote in Fiona's ascent, their malice no match for her light. As the crowd dispersed, Fiona and Liam lingered on stage, the empty theater a canvas of their dreams. They played a soft, improvised duet, their strings weaving a private song. Fiona's violin sang of Brooklyn's resilience, of James's unfulfilled hopes, of Hannah's boundless love. Liam's cello answered, a steady pulse of devotion, their music a vow to face the future together. The notes drifted into the rafters, a melody unbound, carrying Fiona's story to the stars. She thought of the young girl on the balcony, her eyes wide with hope, and knew her music was a beacon for others, a call to rise above. Hannah watched from the wings, her tears drying, her heart full. She'd sacrificed everything, double shifts, sleepless nights, to give Fiona this chance. Now, seeing her daughter shine, she felt James's presence, his laughter in the music, his pride in their girl. Fiona's path to Paris had been a leap of faith, but it had forged a legacy that would endure. She was not just James Harris's daughter, but a voice for every hidden talent, a proof that adversity could birth greatness. The theater's lights dimmed, the stage now a quiet shrine. Fiona lowered her violin, her crimson gown aflame in the shadows. Liam's hand found hers, their fingers lacing, their love a harmony that needed no words. They stepped into the wings, Hannah joining them, the trio a constellation of strength. Fiona's journey, from a bullied student to a global star, had transformed her, but her heart remained the same, a melody of courage, a legacy unbound. As they left the theater, Paris's lights sparkled, a city that had embraced her, a world waiting to hear her song. Dear listeners, Fiona Harris's journey, from a bullied student to a global star, reminds us that resilience and talent can overcome any obstacle. What moved you most about her story? Was it her defiance against Grace's cruelty, her love with Liam, or the legacy of James's violin? Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear how Fiona's triumph inspired you. A heartfelt thank you for joining us on this musical odyssey. Your support fuels our storytelling, so please subscribe to catch our next tale of courage and hope. Until we meet again, keep shining like Fiona, and let your own melody soar. Farewell for now.